So listen, good morning, everyone. My name's Hugh O'Reilly. I am the Director of Development of the Wheel, and delighted that you're all here this morning to find out a little bit more about what is called the Eastern and Midlands Enabling Roadmap for the Green Economy, shorthand EMERGE. We have a sort of a full agenda this morning, and I'm just going to sort of run through that now so you know what's happening and when it's happening. But basically, our keynote speaker this morning is Minister Pippa Hackett, TD. She's Minister for State for Land Use and Biodiversity in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. I know that the Minister is particularly interested in all matters, green, just transition and sustainability. We would have heard her speak at a Just Transition conference in Tullamore there in June. She more recently spoke at the NRN's EIP Agri conference and innovation partnership for their agricultural sustainability. So I know this is an area and the region that's close to our heart. So we're very grateful to have her here. Then we will hand you over to Breda Maher. Breda Maher is the Regional Coordinator for the Eastern and Midlands Climate Action Regional Office. The Climate Action Regional Office is based out of Kildare County Council offices, although they take in responsibility for climate action throughout the region. And Breda will tell you a little bit more about that, and she'll tell you a little bit more about how the project came about and you know what it's all about. Then what we will do is we will hand you over to Dr. Lewis Evans. The lead partners on this particular program are a consultancy firm called Urban Foresight, and we're delighted to have them. And they've done some work in Ireland, although they're based in the UK, but they're sort of an international expert and with international expertise in the area of sustainability. I will just say sort of this morning that the lead for this particular project and the head of sustainability for Urban Foresight is Graham Thrower, and unfortunately Graham had a bereavement in his family earlier in the week and is not with us today. But Dr. Lewis Evans has, very kindly volunteered to sit in and present in Graham's stead. And I suppose on behalf of myself and on behalf of everybody, I'm sure just want to extend my condolences, Lewis, to Graham and his family at this time. And then obviously, because Lewis has been sucked in at the last minute, please hold all the hard questions for Lewis in the Q&A session later. Joking, of course. And then finally, what I'm going to do is hand you over to our own project director, Susie Hahn. Susie is taking the lead from the Wheels perspective in this project. We're obviously partners to Urban Foresight for this program, and Susie will sort of bring you through what the EMERGE project is hopefully going to do over the coming months, and how you as an organization can get involved. I suppose I just want to say sort of my own perspective. While I suppose one of the great things that working in the Wheel I've been working in the Wheel since 2010, and one of the joys of working in the Wheel is that you work sort of in, with, and for communities in all the projects that we do. But I suppose just personally, this one's quite personal because I don't want to give too much away, but there's 20 identified communities in the region that have been identified for this particular project, and actually one of them, if you go out the front door of my house where I grew up in Tipperary and up over the brow of the hill in the field at the top of the house, you would see the Littleton Briquette factory, and one of the identified areas that this project will be working in is the wider Bordemona area around that Littleton Briquette factory. So it's very I suppose humbling, while, as I said, all projects are great to work in. This one might be just a little bit personal to me. You will sort of be relieved that I'm not leading on the project, so the other 7 counties that are involved won't be neglected, but certainly anybody who's on the call today from the Tipperary region around Littleton and Lachine, please do reach out to me. As I said, I'm taking a personal interest in this project. I would love to be involved. The Q&A session at the end, this is obviously throughout the morning. If a question does occur to you, depending on what anybody says, please put it into the Q&A as soon as you think of it, and that will make sure that there's plenty of questions waiting to go as soon as the Q&A session starts at the end. And all of the speakers, including myself, will stay on for that Q&A session. We hope to have you finished up and out of here by around about 11:30. We may run over depending on the Q&A, or we may have to finish it up. And the other thing as well is just in terms of the Q&A itself, it is great for us in terms of you putting those questions in, even if they're not answered today. We can harvest those and hopefully follow up with people, and actually it gives us more intelligence on the ground of what needs to happen for this project. So please do put in any comments, suggestions or otherwise throughout the morning as well. As Kathy-Ann has already said, if you are tweeting about the project, do use the hashtag Emerge Midlands throughout the morning. Now, so there, that's all I need to say for now. As I said, I'll hopefully introduce you to everybody throughout the morning and keep things going at a steady pace. But right now, I would like to hand you over to Pippa Hackett, who's the TD and Minister for State for Land Use and Biodiversity in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and over to her for the keynote words. Thanks very much.
Hello, I'm delighted to address you at the public launch of the Emerge project, a project which will accompany communities along the path from vision of what is possible for the wider Midlands region to implementation of that vision. Let's call a spade a spade. Climate change is a massive problem that impacts us all. Internationally, we are witnessing impacts including drought, food shortages, starvation and mass migration. At home, we are experiencing an increase in frequency of extreme weather events, including flooding and droughts, which can result in loss of income and challenge some of our most precious wildlife. Thankfully, we know how to tackle this, and globally, we must urgently move from our dependence on oil, gas and other fossil fuels, and we must continue to work hard to protect and enhance our living heritage, our bogs, our diversity of birds, animals, plants and pollinators. And we have the knowledge and the legislation in place to do this, both at national and EU level. We will soon have an updated climate action plan in place as a roadmap to reach our challenging emissions reduction targets. I think we all agree climate action is hugely challenging. But as a government and as a nation, we are getting stuck in and making the necessary changes. But these changes, necessary and all as they are, don't impact on everyone equally, as we in the wider Midlands region know only too well, where we have been disproportionately impacted by the move away from peat extraction. But most clouds have a silver lining, and I find it important to focus on the positive, what's possible and within our control. And what a possibility we now have. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to shape our future, and the future we aspire to for our children and grandchildren. But to succeed, we must keep people at the centre of that possibility. And it must be a future by design, not accident. We have no other choice. You are here today attending this webinar on the Engage Training and Mentoring Programme because you recognise this and you want to play a part in putting form on our future. Thank you for that, because you and the communities you are part of are the key to unlocking our vibrant economic and social future in the Midlands. A future full of opportunities for us to promote our region and its unique cultural, industrial and living heritage. And it has a wealth of it. All of us here today, whether you're joining from Offaly or from East Galway, North Tipperary, West Kildare or anywhere else in between, have something in common. We have a passion for the uniqueness of the Midlands. We have a strong pride of place and we value our community and we want to see the best emerge in our region. Emerge is a project supported by Just Transition funding and carbon tax revenue to provide mentoring and to empower communities in the wider Midlands region to meet those challenges ahead. It is brought to you by 3 partners, the Eastern and Midlands Carrow, the Wheel and Urban Foresight, each with a proven history of building capacity of communities to drive their own futures. And that is so important. I'm excited by their planned programme of training and mentoring over the coming 10 months, and I encourage everyone, whatever your background, education, identity or heritage, to get involved. Whatever the focus of your work or your interest, this project is relevant both to you and the people you serve. Avail of the opportunities on offer, from webinars to mentoring, planning toolkits to activation plans. If you don't have a community group yet, sign up anyway. You may well find your tribe. If you take one thing away from today, it is to get involved and remain involved. You already hold the answers. Any external supports can only assist you to help recognise them and identify the best path and the best funding options to bring them to fruition. It may be that life is what happens when you are making plans, but given the place we find ourselves in, history is vital that we plan regardless. Plan, learn, research, and most of all, engage with others. Share ideas and scope projects. Emerge is a platform for this, available and dedicated to us here in the wider Midlands region. I talk a lot about the potential of the Midlands, but what do I mean? I love examples, and here I'll talk about those in Laois Offaly as I'm most familiar with them, but no doubt you will have some of your own. Solis Eco Garden Centre is a Portarlington, County Laois based project that converted a former steelworks into an eco, agri and local economy hub and supports over 100 jobs. Being green can be economical, as Solis proved by renovating a derelict factory at a cost of €250 per square metre, a fraction of the current new build costs, and with a much lower carbon footprint. Circular economy in action. I'm also thinking of the factory outside Burren, County Offaly, an eco-print and design house which places sustainability at the centre of all it does, from the energy that powers the business to the wellness of their employees. It's truly inspiring, and they assert that it is good for business also, that consumers are seeking them out because of their approach. There are many more private enterprises forging a path towards our low carbon future, some supported by Just Transition funding and some not. Social enterprises are joining them too, and I'm very excited to see the development of new social enterprises, which is very much an objective for this government over the coming months and years. In areas from food waste to fast fashion, community energy to bog rehabilitation, social enterprises from men's sheds to much larger enterprises like Food Cloud are having social and environmental impact through enterprise. Again, I believe Emerge can accompany you and your community on this journey. You only need to do one thing today, and that is to sign up to the Emerge project and participate in the upcoming workshops. Engage, emerge, enjoy. Thank you.
And I just want to thank the Minister. As I said, I know she has an incredibly busy schedule, and yes, was absolutely keen that she would make a contribution at the launch of this event today. So I just want to thank the Minister and all of our people who made sure that that happened, because as I said, she's takes a very keen interest in the whole just transition space, and obviously, as she mentioned, I've made a play for Tipperary. She's made a play for Laois Offaly. I'm going to be handing you it now over to Breda Maher, who's the regional coordinator for the Eastern and Midlands Climate Action Regional Office. And Breda, I'm sure you're going to make a play for Laois and Kildare or other places like that as well. So over to you, Breda, and introduce the background and project introduction. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and good morning, everyone. And I'll always make a play for County Laois, Laois Good morning again, everyone. And again, similar to Hugh, I'll apologise. 'Tis the season for a few sniffles, so my voice is also on the low side as well. We're here this morning talking about Emerge, and I suppose behind the context of Emerge is a climate action training and mentoring program that focuses on building capacity and empowering the impacted communities of the wider Midlands region. So I'm just going to talk you through a few aspects in relation to the project, and Susie from the Wheel will continue that on, and Lewis also in as we go through the morning here. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of detail about the programme partners, the context of the programme itself, and the objectives and the scope that we're working to with this project. So as we move on to the programme partners, the Eastern and Midlands, CARO, the Climate Action Regional Office, as we're known as, we're project managing this project, this programme. And it's under the Just Transition Fund, which is funded from the Just Transition Fund itself and the Carbon Tax Fund, and it's supported by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. And I very much want to extend our appreciation to the department for their support of this project also. But we work with our programme partners, which are the 8 local authorities from what's known now as the wider Midlands region. So we have Laois County Council, Offaly County Council, Westmeath County Council, Longford County Council, Roscommon County Council, Tipperary County Council, Kildare County Council, and Galway County Council. And that covers the distinctive region that's been defined as the Just Just Transition region for Ireland. And then we are very delighted, very much delighted to have our programme partners as well, Urban Foresight, that Hugh introduced, and the Wheel also coming on board to optimise the opportunities that are available through this programme for community, for the income impacted communities, I should say. Just a little bit more about the Carrows then. We're a relatively new entity. We've been established since 2018 under the National Adaptation Framework. And our role is to work as part of the local government sector to drive the climate action mandate within local authorities. Now, there's 4 of our offices, and the regions that align with those 4 offices have been defined based on the impacts of climate on Ireland, through the risks and the vulnerabilities of climate change. So our mandate, we work to build on climate action experience and expertise within the local government sector. We work to coordinate and facilitate climate action. We coordinate engagement across various sectors and various agencies and the government departments, and we translate all of that to the local authorities who are working at community and local level in relation to this. Also, another fundamental role that we have is to deliver our own local government sectoral strategy on climate action, which is what we'll come on to next. And it's very important as we look at the 8 local authorities that are involved in this programme as well. We're all working to this sectoral strategy, this higher order vision on climate action. And there's 2 specific goals that the local authorities are working to. The first one there is goal number 5 of that strategy, which talks about mobilising climate action in the enterprise and supporting the transition to an inclusive net zero and circular economy. And there are opportunities that will come out of this programme in relation to that, and we will be working as local authorities to optimise and maximise those. And the second one is goal number 6, which talks about achieving a just transition, particularly for communities that are economically disadvantaged by decarbonising projects. So that's what the local authorities and ourselves as the Eastern and Midlands Carrow will be working towards. But just looking at the programme context for a moment, I think it's fair to say the wider Midlands region, as I referred to, for the purposes of the Just Transition programme, it's defined as the geographical areas of Laois, Offaly, Westmeath, Longford, Roscommon, East Galway, North Tipperary and West Kildare, and Minister Hackett referred to that in her opening address. It's a distinctive carbon intensive region, and it does present very unique challenges for Ireland's low carbon transition. I suppose since the 1940s, the region has been involved in, through the Bord na Móna and ESB, it has been involved in energy generation, but equally on top of that, it's income generation to the communities and the associated supply chains that go with that. Obviously, there was training and education as part of that, and they were very fundamental in building the physical, social and community development aspects of communities in the wider Midlands region. So October 2019 saw a pivotal moment in that era where there was the closure of 2 peat-fired power stations. So the energy generation ceased to be in Offaly, in Shannonbridge, and Longford there in Lanesborough. And that presented a very unique challenge to the wider Midland. That also stopped or ceased the active bogs being worked out. And so there was an impact on directly to people's jobs, but indirectly then to the communities who were supported from those industries as well. Again, further impacts then was the announcement by the Bord na Móna in particular on the acceleration of their decarbonisation strategy, as that company now transitions themselves into green energy technologies and are working through that. That prompted the establishment of the Midlands Regional Just Transition Team, the MRTT, And they have been established to work across 4 particular areas. And it's about securing special status. It's about addressing the needs of the employees, but it's also about addressing the needs of the communities that have been impacted and marketing the region there in particular as well. So stemming from that, the programme context, the response by the MRTT opened up opportunities to seek funding into the impacted communities. And it started with a stage 1, the Midlands engagement process, which was a form of a scoping exercise that invited community groupings, business and other entities to bring forward ideas that they may have in relation to social enterprise or initiatives that would support communities in this transition. And that set about informing the National Just Transition Fund criteria, which was launched in June 2020. And that became the second stage of the process. If you want to just pop it up there. So the Just Transition Fund of 2020, there was a dedicated fund initially of 11 million. It was financed by the government through an allocation of 6 million from an increase in the carbon tax and an additional 5 million committed by ESB themselves. Now that moved on as the project transpired. 56 projects were approved and allocated money, which amounted to 22 million as it happened in the end, and again supported by the carbon tax fund itself. There was 3 priorities highlighted as part of that fund: employment and enterprise supports, the training supports, and community transition supports. Now, this fund is administered by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and it was really supporting projects that contributed most to achieving a just transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy in particular. And our project itself, the Climate Action Training Programme, Building Capacity and Empowering Impacted Communities, was awarded funding under Priority 3 of the JTF, and that spoke about community transitioning supports with the objective to support proactive communications with affected communities and other stakeholders in the regions, establishing best practice, sharing networks and assisting in the development of local transition plans. So that's what we were awarded funding under. Our program is a 2-year program, has a 2-year time frame. We have spent a good bit of time already in developing the program to date for practical implementation in 2023, obviously targeted at impacted communities of the Midlands. And we talk about increasing knowledge, we talk about linking to supports and pulling the various strands together and progressing and advancing into that transitioning process as well. And ideally, again, local authorities are well recognised for being having a very good relationship with local communities. So we would be working through existing economic and community development structures as they are established, in particular through the local authority network as well. The programme objectives then, initially, as we made a pitch to the department under the Just Transition Fund, we were working to 6 objectives, and we still hold those objectives as we go through the programme. The first one there is to create a targeted programme of education, training and mentoring, and that was based on the differentiated priorities of and needs of the individual communities, their strengths, the capacities, etc. So every community is different, and we recognise that in this project. Second one there was assist in building the capacity and empowering impacted communities. And that's really to explore and to capitalise on the opportunities that they possess. And it's to leverage those opportunities and realise positive economic opportunities that can be delivered upon, particularly in relation to low carbon and climate resilient objectives as well. The third one there, supporting impacted communities to, I suppose, honour and build upon their historical, cultural and community identity, which is intrinsically linked to peak generation or the energy generation. And that circumstance is now changing. So we need to kind of reflect on that, what the identity was and how how identity can be evolved in that space as well. The fourth one there was working through existing economic and community development structures of the local authorities. And again, that's just to strengthen dialogue, to nurture collaboration where we possibly can, and create synergies and networks, and just build a strong foundation for successful capacity building partnerships. And it's all about partnerships here as well. The fifth one there, fostering a participative approach within the impacted communities. Ideally, we want to build a shared climate vision for the communities and for the region as a whole in particular. And then the sixth one there was highlighting the importance of learning by doing. This is very much a shared learning space, and we want to be actively and proactively encouraging support and sharing of things as we go through this as well. Just on the program scope then, we are looking at a tiered and targeted approach to this program. This is about eating the elephant in smaller chunks. So as we look across the region, which is 8 local authority areas, we have to see how we can navigate that. And through a series of webinars, community transition dialogues, community activation toolkits, community activation plans, we hope to kind of drill down and gravitate down to 21 specific locations in particular. And those 21 specific locations are highlighted, are identified across the 8 local authority areas, and those have been identified because they have been intrinsically linked to worked bogs and energy generation recently and in the past, and whose impacts have been identified through the work of local authorities and at community level, and also underpinned by the evidence base that supports the EU Just Transition Fund and the operational programme that is emerging there also in the area. So very much based on an evidence base through the experiences of local authorities, and as we move into the EU Just Transition programme also. Just moving on then to my last slide there. Just, I suppose, in terms of the formalities of it, we as a project managers, we are accountable for reporting on the progress of this programme directly to the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. And we do maintain a role there in updating and engaging and liaising with the Midlands Regional Transition Team as well. This programme is very complementary to what is coming down the track in relation to the EU Just Transition Fund and its operational programme there. So that fund itself, it's just to signpost this really. The objective of that is the EU Just Transition Fund is to mitigate adverse effects of the climate transition and supporting the most affected territory, the territory in this instance being that wider Midlands geographical area. They are working to very distinctive objectives. And so while this is complementary to, we see that there is scope and potential for this programme to open up wider opportunities under that EU Just Transition Fund. There's details in relation to that and the operational side of things through the links there on that page as well. But just to note that 84.5 million euro is coming from the EU Just Transition Fund over a period from 21 to 27, and that's being matched by government funding using the Exchequer resources of up to 169 million. So it's just something to bear in mind that this is an operational programme rowing in as we're developing this programme as well. And I think people should familiarise themselves with that programme and how it's being administered through the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly and the department also. The links are there. Hugh, I'm done for the moment on that context, so I'll hand it back to you and I'll be welcoming questions later on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Breda, and that was an excellent introduction and overview, and hopefully gives people a sort of an insight into sort of the overall context under which this project has been developed and where it has come from. So I think well done, Breda, excellent overview there. I will just say to people, put your comments and your questions into the Q&A thing there. I believe somebody has raised their hand, and I know some people have joined after, so that the housekeeping was done at the very, very start. So if any of you have joined, the way the webinar function works is that you have Q&A function, and you'll find the Q&A box down on the bottom of your screen, and you put your comments in there. Again, what we want to do there is harvest all of these questions throughout the morning, so that they are there. I see there's 2 things already in there. Certainly we'll be reading those in the background before we get to the Q&A session, but certainly encourage the rest of you, please add any comments or questions or anything you might have there. And then the other reminder, of course, is just any of you that are tweeting to just use the hashtag Emerge Midlands is the hashtag. Now, I said Breda has given us a sort of an introduction and sort of insight and overview as to where this project came from, as it was the next stage in that process was there was a tender put out to help deliver the program, and the lead partners and the people who were successful in that tender were the consultancy firm called Urban Foresight. And again, our apologies and condolences to Graham Thrower, who can't be with us this morning because of family bereavement, but I'm going to hand you over to his colleague, Dr. Lewis Evans, who's just going to give sort of an introduction and overview of Just Transition and the importance of Irish communities and the importance of this project in that context. Over to you, Lewis.
Thanks, Hugh, and thanks, Breda, for that great overview of the programme. It's really, really useful for everybody to know that. So yeah, thanks again. In terms of what we're going to be exploring today is 6 kind of key things. So what the climate challenge is, both globally and in Ireland. Having a bit more detail on what the actual just transition is, what does that mean, and what does that actually mean for Ireland? What are the most impacted communities in the wider Midlands region? What work has already been done? There's been some exceptional work already being carried out here. We're not starting from a standing start. And how will Emerge really build upon this existing work and unlock more benefits in more places? So that's the kind of key elements that I want to cover today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So starting off from a really broad picture then, what is the actual climate challenge? A lot of people might be already aware of this, but global carbon emissions mean that the world is already heading towards 2 degrees of warming. It's going to have huge consequences, not only for our environment, but also for our economies and societies. So now there's a real pressing need for countries to decarbonize their economies, and in doing so, energy generation is a really kind of key, important part of that picture. And this is even more and more in Ireland as well. So already the government's taken 2 key steps, really. So a key decisive step is cease the industrial harvest and burning of peat. And combined with that decision to invest significantly in renewables, this is really critical. So this has 2 kind of main impacts. It removes the carbon emissions from peat burning, but it also allows remediation of bogs. And that's a major kind of carbon sink. It's enabling the environment to really capture a lot of carbon. So that's the kind of key challenge, really, on a global scale, and it's got some kind of national and local impacts. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how is this challenge really being captured in policy, both by the European Union and by the Irish government? So the European Green Deal recognises that regions and communities require finance really to transition to climate neutrality by 2050. And there's kind of key themes here emerging from this, such as energy and industry, and that will aid that transition. The EU Just Transition mechanism is aiming to support communities who are most in need of support to enable this just transition, strengthen communities and unlock clean economic growth opportunities in key areas. So 55 billion has been allocated to the fund, to the EU Just Transition mechanism, and as Breda touched on, 84.5 million allocated to the Eastern Midlands region. So it's a sizable investment, and it's really critical that this investment's been made. Also, the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act commits the Irish government to reducing Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions by 51% from 2018 levels by 2030. That's a really kind of key step in Ireland's, step towards climate neutrality and just transition. So these kind of key policies have been implemented and are key for this transition. Next slide, please. Thank you. However, there's a series of potential consequences of moving to a climate neutral economy for Ireland. The key one is that cessation of industrial peat cutting and the closure of ESB and A&M facilities in the wider Midlands region. And as a consequence of that, there's been a loss of employment in key areas. But at the same time, that this is really unlocking some environmental and biodiversity opportunities. And there's key funding opportunities presented by the EU and the Irish governments to really address the impacts and to unlock community benefits and enable communities to really capitalise upon these opportunities. This is really, really important for the story of how the Eastern Midlands region really transitions to a climate neutral economy and improving their environmental status. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what's the real just transition opportunity for Ireland? So as I've said, it's had a significant impact upon the communities across the wider Midlands region. But in order to make the transition kind of fair for everybody, we must support those counties and communities most impacted. That's really, really important here. But what actually is the just transition? So we think that the just transition is about ensuring the low carbon future does not leave these communities behind. It's about enabling communities to decide what their future actually looks like and to maximize employment opportunities. And that's the kind of whole purpose and rationale for the Emerge programme, to enable communities really to decide their future and to give them capacity and ability to actually do that. Thank you. So where are the kind of most impacted communities and counties? These communities have been identified by the local authorities and by the counties themselves. So the Emerge programme is all about taking a co-creation approach to helping communities deal with the impacts of the just transition and to enable them to unlock some clear economic, social, environmental benefits for their places, enabling them really to solve local problems. And, you know, Urban Foresight, the Wheel and the Caro, the Irish government are here to do that. So for our work so far, we've identified some kind of key areas of interest and appetite from communities to pursue opportunities really across 5 key themes. So the first one is around upskilling and reskilling in the green sectors. That could be around retrofitting, solar, ground source heat pumps and renewables. The second is around community-owned energy, which is critical for really enabling communities to have control over their own energy future and potentially generating revenue from renewable energy generation locally. The third is around unlocking tourism opportunities. The wider Midlands region is kind of Ireland's hidden heartlands. It's accessible from the west coast and the wider Dublin area. So it's got real potential there for there to unlock some spending and economic benefits and employment benefits across these communities. The fourth is around sectoral development. Now, this should be closely aligned to what communities decide is most suitable for them, most valuable for them. I'll touch on that in a couple of slides' time. And the fifth is around low carbon travel. So every single community has really identified low carbon travel as a priority. This could be through electric vehicles and active travel. And that's a really key element for the community's future, I think. So our approach to helping these communities. So as I mentioned earlier, we recognise there's a lot of work already being done, but we really want to build upon that work and harness the activity and assets that's already happening and the kind of existing community know-how in some locations. So how we're actually going to do this. So the first step is really working closely with partners to identify opportunities, working closely with communities to kind of co-create and identify priority projects. And this is all around focusing upon additionality and bringing value to communities and solving real world problems. So we really want to work closely with communities to do that. And we're creating peer learning networks. So to ensure that kind of best practice and learning is shared across communities that have already started to do this sort of work and start to launch some just transition projects of their own. To do that, to support them, that peer learning network, we'll be bringing out some real world case studies from other communities to share learning and best practice as well. And we're going to create some toolkits. So that's actually providing some practical help to enable communities to actually realize and design projects and to implement projects and to deliver them. and to provide them with the kind of knowledge and understanding and capacity to do that. I think that's really important as well. So what work has already been done to kind of help them impacted communities across Ireland? There's been some great work already been done. And this slide's really just to provide some flavour of that. So community energy owned projects is the first one. So it's about ensuring that kind of clean, sustainable future for communities, generating lower carbon energy and lower cost energy, and unlocking some potential revenue streams by selling excess energy back to the grid, and to have that kind of energy independence as well. That's really critical for communities. The second is around activating really new modes of tourism, whether that's active tourism, harnessing the natural environment, and harnessing heritage and historical assets to draw in new tourists to new tourism sites. The third is around, as I mentioned before, sectoral innovation and providing, working space for SMEs to collaborate and to grow, and for startups to grow. But as I said earlier, it's around supporting communities to identify which sectors are most relevant. So this could be around agriculture, it could be around food and drink, it could be around manufacturing, it could be around high tech. So that's a really important third one there. Green skills is the fourth one. So what are them opportunities around retrofitting housing, retrofitting buildings, ensuring energy efficiency, and drawing upon potential avenues around modern methods of construction as well. The fifth is around building multi-use community hubs. So harnessing where there is existing community capacity, but then providing space for businesses and remote working opportunities for people living in these areas, to essentially create a really positive environment and a kind of multi-use community hub in these places. So that's a really key fifth one. The sixth one is around driving education and training and upskilling to enable a more sustainable future for these communities. And this is critical to build upon the job losses that have been experienced in these communities as well, and to provide a new future and a new direction. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to try and bring in some key examples of communities that have already started to do this and have already kind of paved the way for other communities to learn from. So the first one is the Sustainable Energy Community in County Westmeath, which drove two key projects here. So they offered free evaluations to home and business owners to identify weaknesses in energy efficiency, and provided solutions for homeowners and business owners to improve their energy efficiency. The second part of this is around developing a 5 megawatt solar farm on a former landfill site to generate renewable energy for that community. So this really provided an opportunity to raise awareness within the community and some solid solutions and understanding for generating energy and improving energy efficiency. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second one is around new modes of tourism. So the Lullingmore Heritage and Discovery Park is an existing discovery park in County Kildare. I think this is an important element to demonstrate how peatland areas can be harnessed to attract tourists and to drive the tourism economy. Just Transition Fund has actually funded an extension of a 300-metre boardwalk there, and that will unlock a greater number of visitors, greater local spending, and unlock job opportunities as well. So it's actually upgrading an existing attraction to essentially raise its potential and to attract in new activity and new visitors and new employment. And that also involves the rewilding of peatland areas as well. That's a really good example, I think. The next example touches upon kind of sectoral innovation and SME and incubation. This in particular around kind of food and drink sector. So the Faban Business and Technology Park was established way back in 2003 to essentially create a business cluster which could boost employment. But after ASB actually vacated the top floor of the office building, a feasibility study was undertaken to explore opportunities in the food sector, so actually diversifying the site. It turns out that this site is now at full capacity. There's 70 people currently employed there. It's enabled 40 people to actually launch their own businesses, and it's provided training to over 300 people. So it's a real clear success story here. And it's enabled this area to really have a new direction in having food and drink as as a kind of key specialism, a key local specialism in the region. Thank you. The third example is around green skills and the kind of idea of pursuing retrofitting energy, modern methods of construction. So this example is around home upgrades in North Tipperary. Funding was secured to really promote capacity building, auditing and retrofitting of local housing stock. This was driven by the Energy Communities Tipperary Cooperative. So that involves 14 community energy teams coming together to really drive this. The first step was around raising awareness and engaging communities to get them on board and to make them understand the benefits of retrofitting and energy efficiency in homes. And the second step was around retrofitting 40 homes over 2.5 years. This essentially upskilled residents and enabled kind of community-led energy. And it increased essentially the capacity of communities, and it enabled methods of self-help to really become embedded within communities as well. So it's another success story, and another success story that other communities across the Eastern Midlands region can really build upon and learn from. Thank you. The fourth example is around County Offaly and a remote working and cycle tourism centre. So this is around providing a great example, of building a multi-use community hub, but it's actually utilising an existing community hall. So Kilcormac Development Association received grants to develop the remote working hub and cycle tourism centre. This unlocked some really good job creation opportunities through bike hire and a coffee shop and a tourist office that was actually established there. And it also unlocked Kilcormac's potential as a gateway to Bura as well. It provided a remote working hub for communities and businesses, provided an office hub and meeting rooms. And it also enabled the community to generate income for investment back into other community projects. So again, another success story of how a multi-use community hub can be established. And that kind of reflects the kind of wider trend of remote work and activity across Ireland as well. Thank you. The next example is around education, training and upskilling. So the Ballycommon Training Workshop was established through the Telework and Training Centre there. And this is a community-owned rural social enterprise that essentially delivered some training for residents and local people that were formerly in the peat putting industry, and essentially identified where skills shortages were around renewable energy, around retrofitting, around solar energy and robotics, and actually provided some training for local residents there. Again, this was supported by Just Transition funding as well. And this essentially creates capacity in this region to unlock a new economic future in this area. And it was really a really strong example of how communities can provide targeted and specific courses for local areas and for local people. Thank you. So that's kind of a quick overview of the work that we've done so far, the kind of key priority areas, and a range of case studies showing best practice and how we'll be demonstrating this across the region with local communities. I'd like to hand back to Hugh now to progress. Thank you.
Thanks, Lewis, and fair play to you. I know you were not expecting to be presenting and then had to do so at short notice, and I think you did an excellent job. So fair play. And I just want to say a word of commendation to Graham and Connor and yourself and everybody else in the Urban Foresight team who are working on this project. The breadth of experience that you bring both internationally as well, I think is a real value add to the program. Now, I'm just going to bring you into our final speaker. And before I do, I'm just going to again encourage all of you, please put questions into the Q&A box. I see 5 already there. There's 88 people in attendance. I'm sure there are more than 5 questions between the 88 of you. So be sure to add as many as you can. And we'll hopefully have an engaged Q&A session at the very, very end. So our final speaker of the morning is Susie Cam, who is a project coordinator, project director here in the Wheel. And Susie will be leading with more people in the Wheels team around the community engagement and outreach part of this program. And Susie, you might just bring us through what the Emerge project is and the actual physical things of what will be happening in those communities on the ground. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you. And I think for the moment, we're going to take a little rest from the slides, although I will go back to them to get into the absolute detail of what the Emerge programme is going to be all about. But I'll introduce myself, and I suppose, and I can see it actually coming up in the questions, and this may answer part of it, but we'll put this question to the whole panel as well, is how are we going to be, engaging the communities? And that's really the role that the Wheel is going to take in this. And I come to the Wheel in the last few years of having worked in communities across Ireland in similar related projects about how communities are coming together, looking at how to make their contribution to sustainability in their communities. I've been working with a few years ago 8 communities in West Cork and 16 social enterprises across Donegal. So I think that I want to start but saying that when you go into a community, I wish I could bring the positive spin today, as Hugh and even Cathy Ann and Mairead, who would have been giving some more detail here, who are all from the Midlands. The best I can do is suggest that my perspective as a coastal dweller may see the Midland stories with fresh eyes. I've been hearing more about your stories through managing the Wheels role as we begin this project, and as our staff, Johnny and Maria, have been already reaching out to people in communities, because the Wheel has members of the community and voluntary and social enterprise sector in the Midlands. So in addition to that staff outreach and preliminary engagement, I've also been reading all these, and you've been listening to some of the summaries, of all the summary documents taken from the EU, the Irish strategic plans, to try to understand the strategic and the funding context. And the Minister and Breda, have talked about, and Urban Foresight, the huge significant investment in just transition that's coming into this region. And they've all mentioned how they're taking a partnership approach. So the subject matter experts, and those documents prepared by Urban Foresight's team, they've been very informative to us in that big picture, piece. But I've also been learning so far is that the Midlands have played and continue to play a hugely significant role in our island's history, and that there's many layers to those stories. And it's true, they're not often told, maybe outside of the region, but energy and carbon have been woven through those stories, but so have the asks to people in the Midland communities to step up and play a unique role from the foundation of the state. I learned, moving Ireland to energy independence. And I came across an image looking at other work that people have been doing in the area under the Reimagine, of a Bord na Móna ad, for, come and have a job and become a turf worker and have your rent paid and get a house, and so now the ask is still there about meeting Ireland's really tough to reach climate targets. And I've learned, the specifics of what the Midlands are going to achieve in relation to this most recent transition ask for Ireland, that transition away, as is previously mentioned, from peat for energy will make reductions of up to 9 million tonnes of carbon emissions by 2027. And because the peatlands are currently being rehabilitated at an accelerated rate, 100 million tonnes of carbon will be stored there in perpetuity while increasing the biodiversity in the Midlands. So all those crises and, are being met in the Midlands, and the pace of growth in renewable generation is also greatest in the Midlands. So I think it's fair to say you're contributing the most to Ireland's climate ambition. But it's obvious when you're talking to people in communities that big ask is also having big impacts. And so the Emerge programme is only a small part of how each of the programmes stories, each of these community stories are going to evolve, but we hope to play as useful a role as possible in helping communities turn all these new asks, demands and challenges into positives in your local stories. And a key part of that is that we will be continuing to listen to how is it going so far, what are the evolving stories, critically, who is being left out, what new initiatives are emerging, and the program hopes to support telling these stories, but not just to us, the Emerge team that we've been listening, but to each other through those peer learning opportunities, while giving access to mentoring and support for communities to create their own action plans from wherever they currently are on this transition journey, to being able to have a clearer map of their own next steps. Because to access funding, people will know, you have to have the plan that Pippa Hackett mentioned earlier. You have to have the capacity. And so how others will look at your community stories going forward is hard to say, but it's likely, like Lewis looking in at those case studies, is that they will see the efforts to confront changes in positive ways as inspiring. And we hope to just fill gaps, not replicate existing efforts. What we'll bring is really the ability for that bird's eye view that we've been having today, and to see as much as possible and listen to as much as possible of what is going on, what supports already exist, how are people using them. Like Lewis was talking about, those real world problems, like where are the sticking points, and then where are the local impacts and responses, where are the new initiatives. And also our role is to be the sharer of that through convener of sessions that give opportunities directly to communities to explore, learn and plan together. So I was now supposed to hand over to Mairead, our training manager, who is a proud Roscommon woman, to explain in detail how Emerge hopes to help, but unfortunately she's unwell. So I'll continue to give those details now. So next slide, please there. So in essence, it's a training and mentoring program designed to empower communities in the wider Midlands region to meet the challenges and opportunities of Ireland's transition to a climate-proofed and resilient economy and society. So it's a big transition we're looking at. But go ahead, Kathy, thank you. Kathy-Ann. In practice, what that means is this idea of the unique heritage and resources, and that combined with impacted communities, to work to try to take full ownership of these new opportunities created by climate action and climate action funding and just transition funding. And in order to have action plans to access that, it's probably the single biggest investment in the state since its foundation, and the Midlands were there looking at that energy independence back then. But to own that social, economic and environmental future in the wider Midlands area. Next slide, please. So who can take part? So there are 21 communities, you saw them on the map, that have been identified. And within that, there's individuals, there's community and volunteer organizations, some of whom are members of the Wheel, some of whom we have to reach out to discover. There are the local authorities, employers, the different statutory bodies with responsibility for these regions, but also anyone who wants to contribute to building that future for the impacted communities of the wider Midlands Just Transition region. That's who can take part. Next slide, please. So just the recap of that map of the areas covered that Breda went over in terms of how they were identified and who is involved in that identification. And something that I think that, again, that international experience that Hugh mentioned that Urban Foresight are bringing is that the EU Just Transition Fund is only accessible, and I can be corrected in the Q&A by Breda and Lewis when we come to that if I'm taking this wrong, but my understanding is that it is only for regions that are divesting from fossil fuels. So across Europe, there are only, I think, another 1 or 2 other peatland communities that are kind of under the Just Transition framework understanding. The rest are coal regions of Europe that are also going through this massive shift in energy generation. So that's why my understanding of this is why this particular program emerges focused here. Next slide, please. And then this is the what, and the timeline. So we are in the launch webinar with this broad overview. As we get into beginning in January and February, and I'll go through each of these in more detail in just a moment, but there's going to be training webinars, there's going to be community transition dialogues, and then working with communities to create activation toolkits and activation plans. And you can see that we run those through April, May, and then through the communities, supporting and mentoring communities who are going to be stepping in and working away on their own through May and October, and coming to a close then at the end of October. And so the first one that will kick off will be in January and February. And this is co-created. And I think I want to really make that clear, that you have the background to the Just Transition, the funding, the support available is something that we'll bring to these. But it's also the examples within the region and what people are already doing, and to have a conversation about that. So these will be 4 online events. Urban Foresight have been, as I say, doing research in the region to be able to also demonstrate and show other examples from elsewhere internationally. But we hope to tap into people in existing projects, because there's nothing like that in my experience on the ground in communities, to hearing, well, how did you do that? And when did you think that idea? Where were the barriers? And what's working? I was speaking with a community in Carrigaline during the pandemic who set up their sustainable energy community, and they said, well, we were all retired and there was a pandemic, so we had weekly Zoom meetings and we went through these steps, and then we got this plan together that we could submit for this stage of this particular fund. So it's that very practical existing projects and key local people involved with those that will have like interactive Q&As and information then on how to find each other across the region and maybe internationally, to say that's exactly what we've been thinking about doing. And I believe they're doing that in Scotland or Newcastle, where Urban Foresight are, or perhaps elsewhere in the EU. So that's what those webinars are all going to be about. And I'm going to give you a little metaphor from my gardening. It's a little bit like having a seed tray of 77 in a module and sowing seeds across all those seeds. And then if you go to the next slide, this one, sorry, in the community transition dialogues, we've 21 communities that will host face-to-face events in. And when we say those communities and those names on dots, there's parishes, there's links, there's people from those areas that may want to lean in and say, we'd like to be part of a workshop that facilitates more discussion in our area. So we're this convener in this case. And again, we may have more case study examples, but it's really about listening to each other, discussing those challenges, and being able, as you can see, to feed this back and forth between the lead partners, Urban Foresight, and their researchers and team, all the way to Breda and project managing the project. And, so it's this kind of let's listen, let's interact, and let's prioritize the needs and opportunities and ideas. So that's what the dialogues are all about in specific communities. And then if you go to the next slide. At this point, we want to hopefully stay there as plugging into those specific needs, being quite customized, as sometimes that word toolkit sounds like a fixed entity, but this is like, what is your toolkit? What are you going to need? How will we help participating communities to turn the ideas and the discussions into practical projects? And maybe people have got a project that they're quite far along with, but where would their next steps might be at a different stage, needing plugged into different mentors or different support. Or it could be you're just beginning and the wheel is hugely experienced in helping lots of community groups at their just beginning stage. How will they set up, and what legal structure might they have? And we can plug you into mentoring around all those kinds of pieces, so that communities can be working away, producing their own toolkit, their own resource mapping. What are our resources? What stage in that project lifecycle are we? And then getting to, that critical funding plan and troubleshooting along the way. So that give you a sense of the next months. And when those plans have been created, we'd really like to, all the way along, we hope to create that peer learning network. And just, it's that overview thing. I sometimes think of myself when I'm in a community doing these kind of activations, this is like a matchmaker. It's like, oh, I was over just 2 counties. And it's strange. You think we know about each other, but we can be quite locally focused in our work. So you can say, I just heard, I live in County Wicklow, I just heard down the road in Arklow, they're doing this thing. But, you don't always hear. So as we develop that peer learning network, this will be kind of the culmination of that, to showcase and celebrate the plans and projects that have happened up until October, and just stop and have a kind of moment's view of what's going on. In what stage, and we maybe pull up a couple of specific projects to discuss them in detail, looking at maybe projects at different stages, and offer feedback from each other, you know, peer feedback, mentor feedback, not Dragon's Den feedback, but, you know, the idea of saying, this is where you are, this is the last stage of this particular program. And then we'll obviously be having to sit back and do our own evaluating for what might come next. So how do you get involved? And this is a critical piece for me on today's webinar, is to be able to reach out to us. So as I mentioned, 2 of the wheel staff, Johnny and Maria, have been on the phone talking to people in all the communities so far over the last month. But of course, they won't have been getting to everyone. They're literally just mapping the ground, going, who else should I talk to? Who else should I talk to? So if you know who else they should talk to or want to talk to them yourselves, please reach out to Johnny at wheel.ie or Maria O'Connell at wheel.ie, or you can certainly reach out to me as well as Susie at wheel.ie. You'll also, the Caro is going to host all of the materials that are generated as we go along. So maybe a question gets answered in a community and we find a really good resource, that'll go onto the project's research website for Emerge, as will this webinar when we get the recording and put it there, and this presentation. And you can follow the story. And, you know, if you're part of a community that is already doing things in the Midlands and you feel that we're going to be able to share our story, we're going to be able to tell people what we're doing, please do that from now on under Emerge Midlands, because you're reaching other people within the wider Midlands area, and you're reaching people potentially across Ireland who are saying, I really want to know what you're doing in that social enterprise, or I really want to know what you're doing to, you know, to make a difference. So that's all from me until we get now to Q&A. And so I do see that in the Q&A, we've got questions. I'm going to give people just a moment or two to add some more, and you'll notice, and I see some people have been doing that, that you can upvote the question, so that, you know, we're hoping to, we've got just now until 11:30, and so we will do our very best to get to all the questions that come in there, or we will do our best to find a way to answer those in more detail with people if they reach out to us or on the project's website. So just take a moment there, and either, if you don't have a question of your own, but you see the questions you want to see answered, and I'm going to answer one live, for example, that is the slides going to be available after the webinar? Yes, they are. Okay, so once that's answered, it can, you know, I can type that in, I can put in a yes, and I can send that, you know, so you can see that that one's been answered. Okay, so I'm now going to, we're going to open to a panel view, I think. So if you could put your cameras back on, please, Hugh, Lewis and Breda, and we will start taking the questions that have come in there. So Eva's question, actually, I'm going to answer a little bit more, but I might then let us, we can all speak to this because this got upvoted lots, which was basically, what does that dialogue entail? There's lots, and Eva, I know you've been working in the community yourself with 30 communities under the Just Transition Fund, and we got to talk to you in the research part of this project, as did Urban Foresight's colleagues. So we know, you know, how are we going to prioritise talking to communities. So perhaps we've answered that slightly in the overview I just gave you. And I think that that mention of local authorities made sense, of course, from Breda's perspective. That's who she works with directly. But the Wheel and Urban Foresight will be actually working directly with the communities. So Breda, do you want to take just the one part of that, and anything else you want to say in relation to the design, even of the tender, as to why it's Urban Foresight and ourselves that are going to be out talking to people?
Yeah, and I suppose just to come back in terms of the kind of governance of this piece, us in the Eastern and Midlands, Carol, working through local authorities, and local authorities are our key partners who have applied for the funding here. So it's coming through the local authorities, and the Wheel and Urban Foresight coming in as part of this, and that having that direct engagement with communities and through the local authorities. So local authorities are very intrinsic to this project in particular, just in relation to that. So yeah, that's just part and parcel of the formality of the Just Transition contract with the department on the Just Transition Fund.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I know that one of the outreach that we've been doing is with the community development teams in the local authorities who are the most plugged into the local community groups. So they've been very helpful already. So I might
Susie, can I just
yes,
add
yeah,
there,
jump in there
just to kind of batter home the point that you made sort of on your last slide, which is we have two people working as our sort of community engagement outreach people on this program, who are Maria O'Connell and Johnny Sheehan, two colleagues of ours. So they are on the phones. They've been on the phones for the last month. They've been talking to communities. They've been sending follow-up emails and things like that. We have an audience here of 88 people or whatever it was in attendance this morning. So please reach out to us. We know that we're not going to get to absolutely everyone in time. So pick up the phone, give us a call. Our number in the office is 01454 8727 01454 8727, or just email us directly. And that's how we'll start the dialogues. Okay.
Right. And so I think that maybe this question is also similar, Breda, but it has been upvoted. You can see it there in the chat. But it's basically about how how that relates to LEADER or the Just Transition Fund and all of the aims together, and how will the joined up thinking work, so like the National Peatlands Park linked across the Midland counties and so on. Maybe you could speak to that kind of partnering.
Yeah, there's kind of a couple of dimensions to that. Obviously the work of the Midlands Regional Transition Team, their objectives are to pull all of those various strands together and have that joined up thinking, and that happens through there's 4 working groups. PPN are represented on working group 4, for example. So we could the MRTT pulls those various strands together, and then there's a steering group that sits above those 4 working groups to do that. In addition to that, it is worthwhile speaking to the local economic and community plan of the local authority as well, and very much there's the work of the Department of Rural and Community Development, who have integrated climate action and just transition as key elements that should be included and provided for within the LECP. And again, the LECP, through the structures of the LCDCs, the local community development committees, their role is to pull all those various strands together. Unlike the previous first iteration of the LECPs, just transition and climate action will feature very significantly in those plans. And it is incumbent upon us all to actively participate in the consultation and input and contribution to those plans, to make sure that there is joined up thinking from all players involved. If you don't engage and if you don't participate in that, it loses, things fall between the gaps. So in this particular instance, for the wider Midlands region, between the MRTT, the work of the MRTT and the LECP processes of the local authorities involved, just transition pieces and climate action pieces should be very significant.
Thank you. And I might give this one to Lewis, that because I know that there's another one coming to you, Breda, and I want to give you a break between questions because we suspected there might be a couple. But there's a question here, and there's 2 actually, that really are about distinguishing what a just transition, so defining and understanding what just transition is and distinguishing that from sustainability. And Lewis, there was a sort of related question, which is basically about how do we know that the actions are green or sustainable? How do we understand things all the way, for example, the greener options versus this person's not asking about greenwashing, but they're asking about things like the full life cycle of electric cars, or so can you help distinguish what the difference is between, or the relationship between just transition and sustainability, Lewis?
Yeah, I think the just transition is essentially the process of bringing communities to carbon neutrality whilst not having a negative impact upon them, both socially and economically. And that is a key difference to sustainability, whereas sustainability is essentially the outcome of that process, to enable essentially the actions and projects within that just transition to become sustainable, and to enable communities to essentially have that just transition as a kind of agreed and kind of mutually agreed process. And essentially the sustainability question is the outcome of that, and the actions taken have to be kind of reflective of that sustainability agenda on a global level as well. So that's a kind of key differences there. What was the second question again, Susie?
Well, I suppose, how do we know, or how will a community know, have the expertise and knowledge to know what is truly sustainable? And I think that, you know, that's kind of my understanding of especially Urban Foresight's role in subject matter expertise around this. And there's, you know, it's like interesting. There's a question also coming in from someone who's already, we know there's lots already out there in terms of agencies and things that are happening. And I know you did a lot of scoping of that to be sure you knew about, you know, what was out there. And there's a question about that, you know, when some saying, well, we've actually done, you know, the Sustainable Energy Community Master Plan in Aberystwyth, but it's a broad brush, and now we need to get to a level of detail, and how do we know that those are the right actions? So I think those are the how do we know in a community, and how will we get to that detail?
Yeah, so you've got that kind of broad brush master plan, which is really key for essentially outlining the potential for that transition and the potential for eventual capital investment. But I think to understand the actual kind of carbon benefits and to understand the cost of that, further technical work will be required to actually identify what that is. And you know, there's a range of partners to actually support that. I mean, here in the UK, we have funds to enable communities to actually procure people to identify what them impacts might be, what the costs may be, and what the kind of steps are for enabling communities to actually transition, and what the kind of project, the kind of key investments are to enable to do that, and the actual carbon benefits of them investments. So I think there's an actual middle step there. You know, you've got the master plan, but there's a middle step of having a bit more of a technical feasibility study to actually realize what them capital investments may be and what the actual benefits of that capital investment may be.
Yeah, and that's exactly the sort of mentoring that we hope to be able to offer people. So it's a really living example of what, you know, and we'd be getting into more detail around, you know, us doing some of that legwork for communities, because, you know, definitely my own experience is that communities have the will, the interest, the engagement, the desire to get, you know, doing things, but they don't unless you happen to have, you know, retired people in your community that have a lifetime of experience in every area that you want to work in. You know, they don't always have access to that expertise. So exactly that, it's about how do you procure it, how do you access it, and what can we bring to that. Breda, I'm going to go back to you. You know, thank you very much for Lewis, because that's really live example of what we're hoping to put in communities' hands. But there's been quite a lot of questions, and I just summarize them as, and I know you did try to address this already in your presentation, but it's about the specifics of why those communities. And because the Carrow, there's Billy joining from Enniscorthy, for example, in the southeast, you know, asking about that why, and maybe you could just talk to that again a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in there in relation to the area that is dedicated or designated as the wider Midlands Just Transition Area. Now, it's important to note that this project is under the National Just Transition Fund, which had an area specifically designed. It's the 4 Central Midlands local authorities, Roscommon, and then it was East Galway, West Kildare and North Tipperary, and those were the parameters of the National Just Transition Fund. And those were the parameters, as I see a question there, in relation to the West Kildare Just Transition Plan that was undertaken by under Urban Foresight as well. So that's following the National Just Transition, the parameters and the geographical area that was defined by the department for that purpose. Moving on from that, the EU Just Transition Fund and the programme that's being developed around that sees the area change ever so slightly. That has been underpinned by very robust evidence base done by the Invicon report. And that is, so the monies from the EU Just Transition Fund are kind of targeting a very slightly different region as a consequence. So that's the difference in the regions that you see from the EMRA maps, the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly maps, and what we're working on particularly for this area. Now, coming back to Billy's question, you know, is it intended that to roll out the programme to other areas of the Eastern and Midland Carrow region? Not for the purposes of the Just Transition. There is certainly learnings to be taken, and we will be doing that. I think there's certain things that will be very replicable to other local authorities, other local authority areas, other community initiatives that we will take from this. And that's certainly our role as the Carrows to do that. Insofar as the Just Transition piece goes, it's a very specific designated area under the National Just Transition Framework. It is a very definitive and designated area under the EU Just Transition Fund. That's not something that we have control over in terms of you know, how far we spread it. The most that we can do out of this project is take our learnings, our findings, and some of the toolkits and resources and things like that, and apply them in other community initiatives with other local authorities. So I hope that answers that. It's just coming down really to the work, the evidence base that was done between the National Just Transition Fund and the EU Just Transition Fund.
Yeah, and sharing those, I mean, sharing those wider learnings through all of our mechanisms, through ourselves in the wheel and all of the community, you know, through the social media, through yourselves at the local authorities, that is going to be a significant aspect, I am sure, because it always is. People do look when trying to solve things for, you know, who else is doing that, how have they done it, where has it helped? So, you know, we'll make that a very significant part of collating and gathering and amplifying and sharing everything that is learned here, because I know people look, you know, they look if they're you know, it doesn't matter if they're in Kerry or Donegal, they look and say, oh, have you heard about that social enterprise, you know, that's doing this, could we replicate that? And I think that the more replication of solutions, you know, that are shovel ready, the better. It gets people a leg up to not be starting from scratch. And Breda, I'm going to stay with you for just one more then question, which was about and I know this is something in one of our project meetings that you mentioned to me, and I think it probably will answer some of the questions about what your role in this is outside of the Emerge project itself, but although it may feed into it, in training up the local county council staff themselves, because you know, people are making the comment, you know, can they have their own roadmap, their own understanding, and also the evidence on the ground of things that are still, that, you know, people notice the practice of sustainability. And I know that pre us coming on board, part of your role has been to create trainings for council. And so would you just talk a little bit to that? Because I think it might be, you know, like it's trying to have all the boats rising or whatever that phrase is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to the first question that was put into the chat function there. The Carrows work more broadly in their scope across all services and functions of the local authorities. So while this is a very distinctive project within the realm of Just Transition, we do work more broadly. We do drive the climate action mandate. And we do training for local authorities to build capacity around climate action, knowledge, implementing initiatives. We'll be turning our focus on the local authority climate action plan. What we're trying to do is mainstream climate action into all services and functions of the local authority. We've done that. We started with the adaptation strategies back in 2019. Every local authority has those, and it really is about enabling the individual services of the local authority and the people within the local authority to gravitate towards and incorporate climate action considerations into the work that they do. Now, while I think that commentary is there to say that there's no sign of councils yet implementing certain initiatives or certain ways of doing things. It is happening, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in relation to that. And I see that somebody talking there about the housing developments with roadside hedges and things like that. There's the joined up thinking between departmental funding and departmental their perspective on design and things like that. That all needs to be mainstreamed with climate action. It needs to be climate proofed. Then it needs to be translated down to the local authority to operationalize it as well. So there's a lot of work going on to support certain agencies, certain departments in their work with local authorities as to how to optimize climate action considerations within that and get it rolled out. Just to give you an example, there's research ongoing at the moment within the Carrows about building resilience into the design of roads and the maintenance of roads. But and that will be done with the NTA and the Department of Transport as well. And again, it may not have hit the ground yet, but that research is ongoing and it will hit the ground through guidance and things like that. And that's what the Carrow are involved in particular as well. So, there is a bit of work to be done, but it is being done, and it's all about that mainstreaming aspect of it.
Yeah, it's this whole directional shift as a society, isn't it?
It is,
Everything. It's like
yeah.
taking that transition.
It's a reorientation. Yeah,
it is a huge reorientation for us at every level of life. Listen, we are at 11:30, and we really wanted to close out at 11:30. I think that I did see another question in there about the co-funding and the mechanisms and all of that. I think that's part of what we hope to have those conversations on the ground and look at, those pain points, look at, what communities are doing and where. And, I'm guessing from that question, this is someone who's got experience in trying to do something. And so, we want to basically, hear that and answer that on the ground. So we'll come back to that one, unless Rita wants to say anything on it really quickly. But I kind of want to let you go, everybody. And we will, but do send in the awkward questions. We're not trying to dodge them. We just want to finish the webinar at a reasonable time, and we'll happily direct them. As you can see, it's partnered and it's connected, and we have access all the way through this system to try to do that huge direction change together. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to hand back to Hugh for our kind of Midlands wrap up.
Tipperary wrap up. I'm very, very, very specific.
Very specific. Wrap up.
Yeah, well, I'm the parish of Curtin Glengool, for those of you down that area to know it. So I'll even make it more specific and make it all about Curtin Glengool. So there you go. Listen, folks, I just want to thank everybody who stayed on for the last hour and a half. I hope you got something out of it. What I have just done is I have put into the chat function there for everyone the link on the Carrow website. So carrow.ie/projects -research/collaborations/merged. It is one of those ones that you're probably not going to type naturally, unfortunately, but it's there. Bookmark it. All of the information and all of the various different bits and pieces that we will be doing in this project are going to be put up there. So that's sort of like your home. Obviously contact us all, certainly here in the wheel, where most of us are on a first name basis: Susie, Johnny, Maria O'Connell. Maria is O'Connell because we have two Marias in the office, so we had to have a Casey and O'Connell. So email Maria O'Connell and myself, Hugh@wheel.ie. We absolutely will help follow up on any questions or any queries that you have. This is the start of a project. We hope to be engaging far more throughout the new year and into 2023 with all of you. So please, as I said, you reach out to us. We will be reaching out to you guys in the coming weeks and months anyway. But please, make that job easier for us by reaching out now today and following up. We'd appreciate that. Finally, I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank the Minister for her kind words at the start. I want to thank Breda and everybody involved in the Climate Action Regional Office for the Midlands. It's been great to work with so far, and I think genuinely, all of the right intentions and the right, effort being put into this project from the get-go. Equally, Lewis, to you and all of your colleagues in Urban Foresight, bringing, as I said, that international expertise and that overview that is so valuable, which I think is great. And again, all of my colleagues in the wheel, who, as I said, hopefully will be available to talk to all of you throughout the project. Thanks very much for listening. We ran slightly over. Everything will be recorded. I think we will be sending an email, or I hope my colleagues won't contradict me, but we'll send an email with the links to all of these bits and pieces later on in the next day or two. But certainly I've already put the link into the chat. So if you bookmark that today, they will be up there in the coming days anyway. Thanks very much for listening, and take care.